Welcome back, dear listeners, to Tales of the Tattered Book. Tonight it's time I share my story and how this cursed tome found its way into my hands. My name is Balthazar Callis, Professor of Archaeology and Near Eastern Studies at Miskatonic University here in Arkham. That's what I've called myself for the past 30 years. But names, like everything else, can be shed when necessity demands it. To my colleagues, I am a respected, if somewhat reclusive, scholar of ancient civilizations. They see only what I allow them to see, a man who has dedicated his life to understanding the past through careful academic study, but they do not know who the real Balthazar is, just like you. I know. You do not want to hear the ramblings of this old man. You come here for the stories, I know that. But after all we've shared, all the darkness I've brought into your nights, perhaps it's time you understood who's been speaking to you all along, and by doing so explain why this particular book chose me as its voice. Let the story begins. I was born in Cairo in 1873, during the height of British colonial rule. Not the Cairo of government buildings and European quarters, but the other Cairo, the one where Egyptian children died of fever and hunger while their betters discussed the burden of civilization. My parents were gone by the time I was 7. Fever, the British doctors said, though they barely glanced at the bodies before ordering them removed. After that, I learned to survive in the shadow of the pyramids, sleeping in doorways, begging for scraps from tourists who saw me as just another piece of local color. Those years taught me that the past held more comfort than the present. While other children played with stones and sticks, I listened to the old storytellers in Khan el-Khalili. They spoke of pharaohs who had trafficked with beings from beyond the stars, of gods whose names were older than the Nile itself. To them, I was a useful audience, a child who would sit still for tales in exchange for bread. When I was 15, a relief worker found me half dead in an alley near the Khan el-Khalili Bazaar. By some miracle, she recognized my name. My aunt in America had been searching for surviving family members through the Red Cross. My Aunt Fatima had married a soldier named Joseph Callis, and when the paperwork was finally complete, I found myself on a ship to Boston with a new identity and a new future. Balthazar Callis. The name felt foreign on my tongue, but I wore it like armor against a world that had no patience for displaced Egyptian orphans. At Miskatonic University, I discovered I had what my professors called a natural talent for ancient languages and comparative religion. They praised my intuitive understanding of historical texts, never suspecting it came from years of absorbing stories that academic minds dismissed as primitive superstition. I was a good student, perhaps too eager to please, too grateful for the opportunity to prove myself worthy of my new life. In my final year of graduate study, Professor Whitman invited me to join the Arkham Historical Society. Most members were elderly professors and local historians, harmless enthusiasts of regional folklore. Scholars traveled from Providence, Boston, even New York, to attend our monthly meetings in the basement of the old Kerwin mansion. The Society's work appeared perfectly respectable, cataloging colonial documents, preserving Native American archaeological sites, researching genealogical records. Most members were elderly professors and local historians, harmless enthusiasts of regional folklore. But within this larger organization, there existed a smaller circle, pursuing what they called deeper scholarship. Dr. Rashid Hassan was their unofficial leader, a silver-haired scholar who had fled Egypt decades earlier, carrying knowledge he claimed predated the pharaohs. Dr. Hassan took an interest in my background. He spoke of recognizing in me something familiar, a connection to traditions that had survived in secret. Over the course of months, he gradually introduced me to the inner circle's true work. I was young, ambitious, still carrying anger about the life I'd lost in Cairo, still hungry to prove myself worthy of the new one I'd been given. When Dr. Hassan offered to include me in their research, I accepted without hesitation. I remember his central teaching, repeated so often it became like a prayer. Knowledge must be earned through service, and understanding comes only to those who prove themselves worthy of dangerous truths. For 2 years, I was part of their group. I never fully understood what we were preparing for, but I contributed what I could, translated fragments from ancient papyri, prepared materials for what Dr. Hassan called important research. I felt useful, valued. I never questioned what we were building toward. I trusted him completely. The chambers beneath Sentinel Hill had been sacred ground long before European settlement. Dr. Hassan explained that certain traditions had maintained these sites despite colonial interference, that some knowledge was too important to be lost to the narrow-mindedness of modern authorities. On the night he selected me for what he called our culminating work, I felt only pride. 2 years of faithful service had earned me the right to participate fully in their scholarship. The so-called Inner Circle consisted of 7 members, each handpicked by Dr. Hassan over the course of decades. That night, we 7 descended into those caverns, dressed in simple white robes that Dr. Hassan had provided. We carried torches to light our way through passages that seemed to burrow endlessly into the earth. I felt confused by the elaborate preparations, uncertain of what exactly we were meant to accomplish, but Hassan's confident manner reassured me. Deep within the hill, we found a circular chamber whose walls were covered in symbols I saw in Hassan's translation. Dr. Hassan handed me a scroll containing one of my own translations and asked me to begin the ceremony by reading the words aloud. Then the others would follow with their assigned portions. I started reading it without hesitation. The last thing I remember clearly is Dr. Hassan opening a book with yellow leather binding, aged and worn. In the torchlight, I could make out part of the title embossed on the cover, Le Roi en, the King in. I woke up 3 days later, alone in those chambers, covered in blood that wasn't my own. The cavern floor was slick with it, what remained of the others. The police discovered me wandering the woods near Sentinel Hill, incoherent and stained with gore. They found the bodies in the caves, or what was left of them. The newspapers called it a ritual murder, some kind of occult madness. They never determined exactly what had happened. I spent 6 months at Arkham Sanitarium. The doctors were kind, in their way. They taught me to speak of delusions instead of memories, hallucinations instead of experiences. Eventually, they pronounced me recovered, and I returned to complete my studies. For 25 years, I've built a quiet, careful life around the management of memories that most people would consider impossible. I became Professor Callis, respectable scholar of ancient civilizations. I published papers on comparative mythology, taught courses to students who had no idea what real darkness looked like. I convinced myself that time had healed those wounds, that the young fool who had participated in that terrible ceremony was dead and buried with his companions beneath Sentinel Hill. This is my story. This is who I am, laid bare before you. I appreciate your patience with these old memories, but I suspect you're wondering about the book itself, aren't you? How it came to choose me. 3 months ago, my colleague Professor Armitage asked if I would help organize a private library that had been donated to the university. The collection had belonged to Rabbi Samuel Corwin, an old friend of mine who had passed away the previous winter. Samuel had been a scholar of medieval Jewish mysticism, and his basement held centuries of accumulated texts. I was honored to handle his collection. Samuel had been one of the few people at the university who understood that some knowledge carries weight beyond its academic value. I spent weeks cataloguing Samuel's books, working methodically through his collection, until one day something particular caught my attention. I remember it clearly, as if it was yesterday. I was working late, packing a collection of medieval manuscripts to be shipped to Boston University, when the basement light suddenly changed. Not the usual warm glow of the electric bulbs, but something else. A harsh, acidic yellow that seemed to seep from the shadows themselves. With it came a freezing breeze that carried an acrid scent that immediately brought back memories of that terrible night beneath Sentinel Hill. I found myself walking toward the basement stairs, drawn by a recognition I couldn't explain. Below, I saw a shadow moving behind the far shelves. For one heart-stopping moment, the silhouette looked exactly like Dr. Hassan. The shadow vanished as I approached, but there, wedged between two volumes of medieval commentary, was something that shouldn't have been there. A book with yellow leather binding. At first I thought it was the same book I had seen in Dr. Hassan's hands 15 years ago, but this was something different. Where Hassan's book had borne the title Le Roi en Jaune, this one was unmarked. When I opened it, the pages were empty. Then, as I watched, words began to appear across the yellowed paper. The words appeared slowly at first, as if someone were writing with invisible ink that gradually darkened. Within minutes, a complete narrative, a story unfolding before my eyes about a place I'd never heard of and people I'd never met. I sat there for an hour, watching page after page fill itself. When the first story finished, another began. Then another. I understood what I was looking at, though I didn't want to believe it. I understood what it meant, of course. After 15 years of trying to forget that night, something had finally caught up with me. This book needed someone to read its stories aloud, someone who already knew what it felt like to be part of something terrible. I suppose I'd always known this day would come. Welcome to Tales of the Tattered Book. I am Balthazar Callis, your devoted keeper, and I have learned that the past has ways of calling in its debts when we least expect it. Season 2 approaches, dear listeners, and the book grows heavier with each passing day. The stories continue to write themselves, and somewhere beyond the walls of ordinary understanding, something patient takes note of every voice that listens. Until next time, dear listeners, and may your night be sleepless and your dreams unsettling.